Reverend Wells.
Good. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, our inspiration this morning comes from Psalms 33:12. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people whom he had chosen for his own inheritance. 1 Peter 2:9-10. But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, an holy nation, a peculiar people, people of God's own possession, that ye shall show forth the praises, excellencies of him who had called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, which in time past were not a people, but are now the people of God, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. Then Deuteronomy 30:12-20. Now what I am commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. It is not up in heaven, so that you have to ask, who will ascend into heaven to get it and proclaim it to us, so we may obey it? Nor is it beyond the sea, so that you have to ask, who will cross the sea to get it and proclaim it to us, so we may obey it? No, the word is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart, so you may obey it. See, I put before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him. This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him, for the Lord is your life. Amen. Amen. From these and other scriptures, we see how important it is for every one of us to seek after God and obey his commands found in his book of heavenly instructions. Joshua 1:8-9. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that you mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then shalt thou make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. Have not I commanded you? Be strong and of a good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest. Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, we thank you for the word of God. Herein are the keys to your nation's prosperity and well-being, both on an individual and national basis. If only we will meditate in the word of God day and night, obey it, and allow the Holy Spirit to help us to apply it to our lives on a daily basis. We thank you for the avenue of prayer and your expectation of us according to 1 Timothy 2:1-4. Therefore I exhort, first of all, that supplications, prayers, intercessions be made for all men, for kings, and all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. Lord, the God of righteousness, grant to our Governor General, Dame Marguerite Pindling, strength and wisdom to carry out her duties as statutory head of our nation efficiently and effectively. Continue to grant our Prime Minister, Most Honorable Dr. Hubert Minnis, our Deputy Prime Minister, Honorable Kevin Peter Turnquest, our Cabinet Ministers, Members of Parliament, the grace to lead our nation, that they may use their gifts and abilities to serve the common good and to seek that unity which is your gift and your will, through Jesus Christ our Lord, who came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Grant to our opposition members, led by Honorable Philip Grave Davis, the wisdom and boldness to keep our governing members accountable for their actions, keeping the spotlight on serious matters, and have them resolved as quickly as possible. We pray for Honorable Mr. Speaker, his deputy, Honorable Mr. Sanders, that you will grant them wisdom beyond their years, that they will continue to guide our honorable members according to parliamentary procedures. We pray for our Chief Clerk, David Forbes, and the support staff, that they may continue to serve efficiently and effectively our honorable members. We pray for those in authority over us. We pray for judges and law enforcement officers, that they may govern themselves according to Deuteronomy 16:18-20. You will not pervert justice. You will not show partiality, nor take bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the righteous. You shall follow what is altogether just, that you may live and inherit the land which the Lord your God is giving you. Finally, I pray for the spouses and children of members of Parliament, that you will keep them safe from all accident, harm, and danger, while our honorable members may be absent from their homes doing the business of the nation for which they were elected. What can we say to our God, who has been and is so good and always faithful to our nation? What to say? Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, and his mercies endure forever. Can you say it with me? Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, and his mercies endure forever. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies we see. All that we needed, thine hand had provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto us. Honorable members, praying together, the prayer our Lord Jesus Christ taught his disciples to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Honorable members and members of the gallery, while we are still on our feet, if we can observe a moment of silence in recognition of the passing of one of our colleagues and former member in this place and Cabinet Minister, Bradley Roberts. Thank you very much, honorable members.
Dr. Hubert Minnis, Peter Kirkcraft, Brent Simonet, Desmond Bannister, Brentwood Wells, Jeffrey Lawrence, Dr. Dwayne Sands, Marvin Dames, Frankie Campbell, Dionisio Diagula, Michael Pintard, Darren Henfield, Romuald Barrera, Renisha Rose, Brenzo Rose, Ellsworth Johnson, Philip Davis, Vaughn Miller, Lakeisha Parker Edson, Hiram Lewis, Carlton Bowler, James Aubrey, Travis Robinson, Adrian Gibson, Donald Saunders, Frederick McAlpine, Hank Johnson, Mark Hume, Michael Pope, Miriam Refi Emmanuel, Reed Shipman, Reuben Rami, Ricky Massey, Lauren Cartwright, Cornell Ferguson, Leonard Anna Martin, Tyso Ford, Chester Cooper.
Good morning, honorable members. This morning, we are graced with the presence of two distinguished bodies of persons. The first being the contingent from the Bahamas Baptist Missionary and Educational Convention. Can you please stand for me? Thank you. As we get further down in the agenda, the honorable member for Yamacraw will give you the proper personal recognition as he presents the bill before us today. Also with us today are members of the family of one of our cultural icons, Edmund Moxie. We are happy to have his wife, Sylvia, with us, and a number of his children. Can you please stand for us? Thank you very much. The chair has acceded to a request by the honorable member for St. Barnabas, who will give us some details on the cultural week being planned, which will be hosted on the site that is presently known as Big Pond Park, in recognition of our cultural icon, Edmund Moxie. The chair now recognizes the honorable member for St. Barnabas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Good morning. First, let me give thanks to Almighty God, who is the great architect of the universe, for giving me the health and strength to stand before you today in this beautiful Commonwealth of the Bahamas that I always will contend is the greatest nation on earth. Mr. Speaker, the 2017 general election will forever be inscribed in my mind as an important personal reflection point on my ongoing, lifelong call to service to the Bahamian people and the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. In all my imperfections, Mr. Speaker, duty, honor, and gratitude have always been mainstays in my personal life, and I will work continuously to ensure that it occupies a stubborn presence in my political life. Mr. Speaker, it is in service to my duty to our country, future generations of Bahamians, honor to the best principles in us that should liberate us from our toxic political biases, and gratitude to the legacies of Bahamian men and women, all who have illuminated the corridors of Bahamian history, that I offer this brief statement for this honorable House this morning. I've taken this approach, Mr. Speaker, mindful that regrettably this honorable place at times is viewed by the Bahamian people as a political coliseum incapable of moments of elevation, moments that transcend our politics, moments that inspire hope. Mr. Speaker, it is in the spirit of reverence and honor to sacrifice that I inscribe these words of tribute to the late Edmund Spencer Moxie, a husband, a father, politician, nation builder, and seen by scores of Bahamians as the father of Bahamian culture. During the historic 1967 general elections, which brought about majority rule for Bahamians, the late Edmund Spencer Moxie was elected by the people of the Coconut Grove constituency. A musician by trade, Mr. Moxie was born in Ragged Island, Bahamas, to the parentage of George and Naomi Moxie, who were also musicians. He grew up in a close-knitted community and recognized that expression of oneself was paramount to being true. He had a love for his fellow Bahamians, and immediately after being elected, embarked on a course to further the social, economic, and cultural position of the Bahamian people. The annual Coconut Grove Festival gave the people the opportunity to express in song and dance, and to display and sell a variety of Bahamian food as well as straw products. Thatch huts were constructed for the festival, and after having to break them down each year, Mr. Moxie embarked on an ambitious venture to create a permanent structure. Mr. Speaker, so began the emergence of the famed Jumbe Village. The land requested, owned by the government, was the old Blue Hill Road dump site. Mr. Moxie enlisted the support of government agencies, private citizens, and school children to raise funds and to provide labor. The old swampy dump site was cleaned up and filled in, creating a beautiful site where thatch huts, Granny's Kitchen, the art museum, the auditorium, a nature walk, and a pond all served to create an environment of vibrant Bahamian culture. Also at the site, rake and scrape, quadrille ring and play, heel and toe polka dances, chorale singing, poetry reading, as well as John Canoe. Mr. Moxie also started the Coconut Grove Coconut Grove Center on Auckland Street, which housed the first over-the-hill clinic, a library, a homework center, and a preschool. It was developed into an oasis where the people's social and educational needs could be met. Mr. Speaker, Edmund Spencer Moxie embodied the quintessential Bahamian patriot and understood that through our expressions of culture, we would be empowered. He fully embraced the notion that in order for us as Bahamians to become what we are capable of, we must cling ferociously to those elements that make us uniquely Bahamian. Mr. Speaker, I've always firmly believed that culture is the soul of our people and our nation. And if we do not harvest it, cultivate it, entrench it, and export it, we would see the depletion and inevitable loss of both our Bahamian identity and the patriotic commitment of future generations of Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, Edmund Spencer Moxie will be remembered as a visionary Bahamian who sought to uplift the lives of the Bahamian people through the power of Bahamian culture. It is our duty, Mr. Speaker, to fan the flames of culture ignited by Edmund Moxie some 40-plus years ago. Edmund Spencer Moxie, a Bahamian patriot of the highest order, who taught all of us that to not only believe in ourselves, but to celebrate us. And as I conclude, Mr. Speaker, let me just say that from I was a young boy, and I'm sure I'm still a young boy in many ways, persons would have heard of the stories and visited Jumbe Village. So this Edmund Moxie Cultural Week that is planned for the 11th to the 17th, while on one hand it is about a larger discussion about Bahamian culture, it is also an important lesson because the late Edmund Moxie and his family would have suffered tremendously.
They did.
You know, I'm so overcome with emotions this morning, Mr. Speaker, because politics should never diminish our humanity or the contributions of any Bahamian. And so these are tears because of the love that I have for my country and for all of us that aim to make this country better. And so This also is about reclaiming as much as we can the legacy of Edmund Moxie, Mr. Speaker. And the last thing I would just like to do is to share the schedule of events, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much for indulging me. On November 11th, this coming Sunday, we will have a church service at the historic First Baptist Church. At the First Baptist Church. And so I'm extra pleased that in the gallery this morning, Reverend Diana Francis, who will be hosting us. And on November 12th, at the now Big Pond Park, we will have an exhibition at what will also be called the Edmund Moxie Youth Center. On November 13th, we will have a panel discussion at the University of the Bahamas by a lot of our other cultural icons, again, about this larger discussion about Bahamian culture. And on Wednesday, November 14th, we will have a documentary screening of The Price of Being a Man, The Undoing of Jumbe Village at the Cynthia Mother Pratt Park in Coconut Grove. On Thursday, the 15th, Mr. Speaker, we will be honored that the Prime Minister, Most Honorable Dr. Hubert Minnis, will be at what is now the Big Pond Park that will be renamed the Edmund Spencer Moxie Park, where also in conjunction with the Ministry of National Security and the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture, the commissioning of the Edmund Moxie Youth Center, as well as the unveiling of the Edmund Moxie sculpture at what would be the new Edmund Spencer Moxie Park. And finally, Mr. Speaker, on November 16th and 17th, Friday and Saturday, the revival of the Coconut Grove Festival will be at hand. So we are inviting, of course, not only people in the constituency of St. Barnabas, but people from around the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, tourists and Bahamians alike, to come down to the Edmund Spencer Moxie Park, opposite Super Value on Blue Hill Road, where we will have a full grand celebration, grand Bahamian celebration, to celebrate us, celebrate what it is to be Bahamian. Mr. Speaker, I thank you very much, and I'm honored that the Moxie family is here this morning, and I am also grateful and humble for the work of the Edmund Moxie Cultural Week Committee, who's here, who's chaired by Mr. Sufent Roll, and just grateful for this opportunity to do my small part to again reclaim the legacy of a great Bahamian. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Ordered that the communication be brought up. Ordered that the document to lie on the table. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Member for Mangrove Key, South and Central Andros.
Thank you, Speaker. I would like to join my colleague, the member for St. Barnabas, and thank the Leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition, the Honorable Philip Brave Davis, my parliamentary colleagues for affording me this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, I'll be very brief. For me, to see the Moxie family is a very reflective one and a very personal one, because for many years their father would have been a part of the historic cathedral on East Street and lived in the Valley Corner on old years rolling out night. And if you would have been a young man like me back in the late 70s, early 80s, and going there with the late Bishop Harcourt and Pinder, and to have Mr. Moxie bring the harmonica and the concertina, or the accordion, as they would want me to say, I'm in New Providence now, as I what we call it concertina. And he could have showed Pompey them a thing or thing back home in Cat Island. You know, the honorable member for Cat Island would like that. But he was a cultural icon, and one we really relish. And to Lady Sylvia, it's good to see you, my dear. You're looking well. To Marva and Pastor Mario and the family, I know them personally. Also, there was, I would say in my final 40 seconds, that his song would have might have cost me get a cut skin on this good old Baptist morning some years ago, when you turn on the radio to play what old people call the devil music, and there was a song that Moxie was made about the late Edmund Moxie. Na 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 gulagungulug na 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 gulagungulug Moxie gulagung Edmund Moxie na. So you know what I'm talking about. And you can imagine. You can imagine my Church of God, Mama and Papa in Smithsville. Me and my brother gathered on, we beating on the top. Moxie, Edmund Moxie, gullick. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, this is a personal moment. So, since Barnabas, I don't need much of an invitation. I'm glad to celebrate this man. I'll be joining the Honorable Cynthia Mother Pratt, who would have done much to try to revive this effort along with you. And most importantly, also, I know the fact that talking about the church, and this is a church day today, that he and the Honorable Janet G. Bostwick would have served as youth directors and youth pastors in the Church of God back in the day. And so, for me, this is a special, special day, Pastor Mario and Lady Sylvia. And today we celebrate him on this side. He's done well. And he left us all the more prouder to be Bahamians. And his replication of putting something in the grove made people of color, our people, feel proud to be ethnocentric Bahamians. So today, I am proud to celebrate Moxie, Edmund Moxie, and may his soul rest in eternal peace.
Honorable members, just before we proceed with the order of business, I have two reports from the Auditor General's office that I wish to table at this time. The first being an audit of the procurement procedure of the Public Hospital Authority, PHA, for the period the 1st of July 2015 through the 30th of June 2017. The second report is an audit report of the accounts of the Department of Local Government, Maguana District, for the period December 2016 to April 2018. Order now that the reports to lie on the table. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Kelani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. The Bahamas Registered Stock Directions 2018, Bahamas Registered Stock 2023 and 2035.
Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the document to lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. The Bahamas Register Stock Directions 2018, Bahamas Register Stock number 3, 2021, 2023, 2025, 2028, and 2038.
Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. The Bahamas Register Stock Directions 2018, Bahamas Register Stock 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. Public holidays, National Heroes Day 2018, opening of shops, notice 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. The Price Control General Amendment Number 5, Regulations 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
There are none, Mr. Speaker.
Statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, given the circumstances that have given rise to the temporary spike in the fuel surcharge component of consumers' electricity bills, the government is mindful of the impact that this increase has on all Bahamians, but especially on the poorest and most vulnerable. This situation is a legitimate issue for every Bahamian. However, there are a small few who are seeking political mischief out of a serious situation, who know full well the set of circumstances that have built up over several decades and have led us to this point, and who also know that this
Honorable members,
is the one that is putting in place the plan to address this. Mr. Speaker, you would recall that the government in the 2018-2019 budget provisions made allowance that would exempt Bahamians whose monthly bills were under $200 from the payment of VAT. This was and remains a deliberate policy initiative to assist Bahamians of modest means. This recent temporary spike in fuel surcharge has unfortunately put a number of the qualifying customers over the 200 threshold. Thus, I today advise the Honorable House that the government will be moving an amendment to the law to allow for a temporary increase in the VAT exempt ceiling from $200 per month to $300 per month through the end of the fiscal year, that being June 2019. This will be made effective for December 2018 and will show up in the January billing cycles. The trends in the cost of the delivery of electricity will inform any decision to extend the increased exemption ceiling into the new fiscal year beginning July 2019. Additionally, I requested the minister responsible for BPL and the BPL team to review and report back to Cabinet on the full range of options open to the government to address this temporary spike in electricity bills, and even as we execute the longer-term strategy to reduce energy costs in the Bahamas. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I wish to assure the Bahamian public that we remain resolute in the need for the country to substantially reduce its energy costs and the undue burden it places on Bahamian citizens and on the cost of doing business in the Bahamas. We will continue to explore the reduction of energy costs. We will make a substantial transition to solar and other renewable energy supplies. You will hear much more about these plans and strategies in the coming months. Mr. Speaker, I would only like to inform the public that as a result of the fire at the Clifton station, I repeat, as a result of the fire at the Clifton station, Mr. Speaker, 2 generators were damaged, thus taking about 70 megawatts of energy out of the supply at Clifton, resulting in the Blue Hill power station being utilized to make up for the additional 70 megawatts energy. And I want them to note that the Clifton utilizes bunker C, which is by far cheaper than what is utilized at Blue Hill diesel, which is over $5 per gallon. So as a result of the fire and the subsequent switch to ensure that electricity is provided for the nation, the cost would have subsequently increased. However, Mr. Speaker, the Minister with responsibility for energy will make a complete report as to what has happened and our movement in resolving this both short-term and long-term. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the communication be brought up. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Care Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
The nature of the communication is such that it requires a response from
Honourable Member.
And I ask you so to do.
Order that the communication to lie on the table.
And I ask you so to do, because...
Honourable Member.
Yes.
The Chair is not of the view that anything in the communication was contentious or controversial that warrants a response.
Because once you introduce political mischief, that in itself introduces the divide. It introduces a divide. And and the member has suggested that that a few people are now making this issue a political issue. Mr. Speaker,
Honourable Member.
I just released a statement this morning.
Honourable Member.
Huh?
We are at the point of statement and communication by ministers.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
The Chair is not of the view that the remark made was contentious or controversial that warrants a response.
Speaker, I don't share the view, but since the Speaker so does, I'll speak about it. Huh? You know.
Honourable members, further statements and communications by ministers. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for South Beach.
Honourable Speaker, with your leave, sir, I wish firstly to extend my deep honor, appreciation, and regard for members of the Baptist Missionary and Educational Convention, among whom are some of my contemporaries, such as the Reverend Dr. Philip McPhee and the Reverend Diane Francis, and some of my mentors, such as the Reverend Dr. Fernando and Pastor Simeon Hall, but among all of whom I share a deep affection and regard. I also wish, Mr. Speaker, with your leave, sir, to offer further congratulations and support and respect and admiration to the late Edmund Moxey, and to his family, his wife Sylvia and their children, for the magnanimous and indelible contribution made to this country by Mr. Moxey. And if you would permit me, sir, to share just a brief story. In 1998, while as executive director of the Youth Empowerment and Skills Institute, commonly known as YEAST, I invited Mr. Moxey to come and do a performance for the young men of that institute. Young men between the ages of 16 and 19. Mr. Moxey came and brought with him his, as member for South and Central Andhra said, the concertina, but the accordion, a tub, and a saw. The 15 or so young men in the Yeast Institute at the time started sucking their teeth and protesting subtly that I had brought these old men to come and share some musical repertoire with them. Because as you would expect, Mr. Speaker, in those days, the riveting fascination of the young men at that time were artists that hailed from Jamaica, in the reggae community. Mr. Moxey began his presentation and his renditions, and within a matter of few moments, he captured their attention and imagination such that he gripped it for the next ensuing 1 hour. Throughout the remaining year that they were with me, Mr. Speaker, they begged me to bring Mr. Moxey and his trio members back for an encore, again and again. And of course, you know the music Mr. Moxey would have going down Burma Road and the rest of the story. So he is a person and a soul and a mind and a contribution of great admiration by myself and our people from the wonderful community of South Beach. Honorable Speaker, I bring to the attention of this honorable House and the Bahamian people circumstance of an industrial nature at the C.H. Reeves Junior High School, Robinson Road. On Monday, October 29, 2018, it was brought to the attention of the Ministry of Education that teachers at C.H. Reeves Junior High School had withdrawn their labor. This came without prior notice, as the protocol for grievances had not been enacted. The reasons cited were suspicion of the presence of mold in 12 classrooms, leakage in a few of the classrooms, termite infestation, and leaky toilets in one block of the girls' bathroom. The Ministry of Education requested the assistance of Mr. Anthony Ryan of the Environmental Monitoring Risk Assessment Division at the Department of Environmental Health. He made an assessment of the affected classrooms and found what he described to be, quote, recognized environmental concerns, end quote, including, in particular, dust and accumulated dirt. He subsequently formulated a prescription to rectify those issues. Acting immediately upon the recommendation by Mr. Ryan, the Ministry of Education engaged the services of a contractor who conducted the remediation process. This included the removal of mildew, the cleaning of dust on ceiling beams, the cleaning of air-conditioned units, window sills, and elsewhere. Other contractors effected repairs to the leaky roof and to faulty toilets in one of the female students' bathrooms. In good faith, the management at the Ministry of Education made the decision to suspend classes on Wednesday, October 31st, to Thursday, November 1st, in order to begin the remediation process. Meanwhile, parents were advised to keep their children at home, while teachers and other staff were asked to report to school. Teachers were also asked to work from the staff room and engage in lesson planning the marking of student books, the preparation of examinations, and other school-related tasks. Despite the fact that this arrangement was agreed with the Bahamas Union of Teachers, BUT, the majority of teachers left the work site well before the normal dismissal time of 3:15 p.m. Following the classroom cleanings, Mr. Ryan conducted another assessment and provided the Ministry of Education with an oral report which indicated that the school was suitable for occupancy. However, on Friday, November 2nd, 2018, the teachers at the C.H. Reeves still refused to work, despite the fact that a new classroom schedule was constructed by administrators that accommodated all classes without them having to use the newly cleaned classrooms. Instead, the teachers insisted upon being provided with a copy of a written report prepared by the Department of Environmental Health Services. To accommodate the additional repairs, sir, the executives of the Department of Education, in conjunction with the school's administrative team, decided that the school would temporarily operate on what is known as the staff meeting bell schedule. This means that classes would be dismissed at 2 p.m. daily until the repairs would have been successfully completed. However, on Monday, 5 November 2018, this Monday past, teachers again abandoned their posts, leaving students dangerously unsupervised. The Ministry of Education received the official written report from Mr. Ryan at the end of the workday on Monday past, which was shared immediately with the Bahamas Union of Teachers. At BUT's request, the director, Mr. Marcellus Taylor, and his executive team arranged a meeting between Mr. Ryan, that team, and BUT because the union claimed that they did not understand the report. The meeting was arranged for 3 p.m. Tuesday, yesterday. However, at 3:10 p.m., 10 minutes after the agreed time, the union called to say that they were otherwise engaged and could not meet. The union has not been heard from since. After reviewing the findings and recommendations advanced in the environmental assessment report conducted by Mr. Ryan, carried out at the C.H. Reeves Junior High School, the Ministry of Education was and is satisfied that the entire campus was and is safe for occupation by students, teachers, staff, and students. Tuesday, November the 6th, 2018, yesterday, despite all efforts made to rectify the situation at the C.H. Reeves Junior High School, teachers still refuse to report to classes. At this point, teachers began questioning the validity of the written report provided by the Environmental Monitoring Risk Assessment Division. As of this presentation, sir, the teachers remain out of the classrooms while yet on campus. The ministry has taken immediate and urgent steps to mitigate this unfortunate set of circumstances by this morning providing supply teachers to assist administrators and the remaining 10 teachers who have not participated in the walkout. Sir, C.H. Reeves is a junior high school, grades 7 through 9, established in 1972. Today, it has a population of 1,020 students, 7 administrators, 74 teachers. End of term exams are 3 weeks away. BJC exams for ninth graders begin at the end of May next, 6 months away. The BJC exam passes, Mr. Speaker, are crucial to a public school student qualifying for graduation at the end of the 12th grade. I am further advised, sir, that the curriculum in our public school system requires a minimum of 196 contact instructional days to complete. It has been observed that in most school years or academic years of recent times, the ministry barely squeezes in 176 days, 20 days less than the ideal number. So it is then, Mr. Speaker, a continuing hazard to the elegant development of our children in this frenetically advancing global community, where the competitive advantages can only be assured with a properly trained, skilled, and educationally equipped population. This issue is being addressed. So when incidents of this industrial nature happens, our children are severely challenged in having their educational needs and ambitions met and addressed. The ministry expresses disappointment at the actions of the C.H. Reed's teachers, who have blatantly ignored the grievance procedures outlined in the industrial agreement between the Bahamas Union of Teachers and the Bahamas government. They have also disregarded the expert opinion of those at the Environmental Monitoring Risk Assessment Division of the Department of Environmental Health Services. Most of all, they have reneged on their responsibilities and neglected the education of our youth and the future of our nation. Mr. Speaker, according to the industrial agreement between the Bahamas government and the Bahamas Union of Teachers, BUT, Article 1.6, it states the following, and I quote, "The employer and union will work towards reaching an amicable settlement on all matters as hereinafter provided for in this agreement. It is agreed that until all possibilities of settlement have been fully explored, the union and/or the employer, respectively, will not take part in or support any industrial collective action in the nature of a strike or a lockout." That industrial agreement continues in Article 27.6, subsection 1, which says, and I quote, "An aggrieved employee or union representative shall, in the first instance, discuss the complaint with the principal or supervisor. The principal or supervisor shall be given 5 working days to give his reply. If a satisfactory solution is not arrived at, the employee or the union may, within 5 working days following the receipt of the reply, request a meeting of the district superintendent and management. And if that matter is still yet not resolved, the union again, or the employee, may, within 5 working days of the receipt of such decision, request that the supervisor of the HR, the Human Resources Department, in the Department of Education, schedule a meeting with the director within 5 working days to seek a resolution of this matter. Mr. Speaker, this particular grievance procedure in the industrial agreement was never exercised. Sir, the parents of the children enrolled in the public school system in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas send their children to school with the expressed and tacit expectation that they will receive necessary instruction, edification, and training for their own personal advancement in a safe, caring, professional, disciplined, and respectful environment. The Ministry of Education, unfortunately, recognizes that in the past 7, teaching days, this has not been the case. Despite this, sir, Ministry of Education and the government of the Bahamas cannot absorb a rationale for actions taken by teachers at ACH Reeves, and therefore urge with great and compelling sincerity that they return immediately to work. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the communication be brought up.
I'm wondering
Honorable Member for Engliston. Honorable Member, we are at the point of statements and communication by ministers.
I'm wondering if the minister would indulge me because I was there this morning and it's a serious situation. In fact, I spoke with them.
Honorable Member for South Beach. Order that the communication be no lie on the table. The Honorable Member for Angliston is seeking your consent to speak in response to your communication. This is ordinarily not the point on the order of business. However, if you have no objection,
Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, there's a point in the agenda for this, so you know, I seek the guidance of the chair.
Honorable Member for Angliston, thank you, Honorable Member.
The minister will not allow me to voice on behalf of my people. No problem. I just trying to get on the same page with it.
Further statements and communication by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, rise on the occasion of this historic bill. But before we get there, Mr. Speaker, just wish to report, as mandated by our Prime Minister, on travels and conferences or investment tours that we have participated in. And on this occasion, just a brief overview of the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources, as well as a representative from the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health, attending the Caribbean Week of Agriculture, October 8th through the 13th, under the theme Strengthening Agriculture for a Healthier Future in the Region. This meeting, Mr. Speaker, was held in Barbados. Mr. Speaker, we had a representative from the Ministry of Education, Ms. Patrice Green, who did an incredible job. She participated in the school feeding program and social policy instrument for food and nutrition security workshop. Mr. Speaker, the workshops and exchange between various Caribbean countries focused on food security, but more importantly, having the correct food in order to strengthen our young people. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, in collaboration with the Faculty of Food and Agriculture of the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine's campus, organized a seminar on school feeding programs as social policy instruments for food and nutrition security. Mr. Speaker, the seminar, which was held October 8th through the 9th, presented school feeding as a critical driver and an integrated social policy instrument to address food insecurity, malnutrition, and hunger in the Caribbean, as well as, Mr. Speaker, in the broader region. Mr. Speaker, within the framework of Sustainable Development Goals 2030, discussions were held on how to mitigate against malnutrition and hunger in the Caribbean sub-region. The seminar offered a forum for discussion, reflection, learning, and consensus on a set of proposed actions that would be presented to CARICOM Council for Trade and Economic Development, COTED. That meeting, Mr. Speaker, was also held during the Caribbean Week of Agriculture. By way of background, Mr. Speaker, and our church community knows this better than probably any other group, children attend school at an age when food and health habits are being formed. Schools also influence families as well as the school community and can be a channel for wider community participation. Recent studies from several institutions, including FAO, suggest that with the promotion of better diets and nutrition, as well as physical activity through schools, provide health and well-being benefits that extend beyond the classroom to households and wider community. With this in mind, the traditional notions of the importance of school meals or feeding programs have evolved to include provision, access to adequate food, energy, and nutrients intake, opportunity for food and nutrition education for the promotion of healthy eating habits and lifestyle, opportunity for linkages with fresh and nutritious local food production and consumption, leading to the strengthening and diversification of local food systems and allowing improved market access for the livelihoods of local or smallholder family farmers and local agriculture entrepreneurs. Mr. Speaker, consequently, school feeding has emerged as a major food and nutrition security strategy. This is particularly true for the Caribbean, where food and nutrition security is greatly hindered by non-communicable diseases. The fact that most of the countries in our region, with the exception of Guyana, Belize, and Haiti, are importing 60%, and in some cases, especially in our case, we're importing more than 80% of the food that we consume in the Bahamas. And so, Mr. Speaker, this was a very important workshop, and it concluded with a set of action and recommendations that was presented in the form of a seminar statement which went on to the leaders of the agriculture communities throughout the region. Mr. Speaker, that was one of the participants. Another one of the participants who attended Caribbean Week of Agriculture was Mr. Edison Delaveau from the Department of Marine Resources, and of course from the Department of Agriculture was Ms. Charmaine Price. And Mr. Speaker, several important matters were discussed, inclusive of the issue of illegal harvesting of marine products, not just by nationals, but by others who make incursions into Bahamian waters. And so, Mr. Speaker, just a few short points that emerged out of the marine resources discussions throughout the region. One, there was a commitment to review the protocol on climate change and disaster risk management. Secondly, there was an update and review of the draft policy on decent work and gender equality mainstreaming in fisheries, that is, increasing the participation of women in the fisheries sector throughout the region. Three, there was an update on the Norwegian-sponsored project to improve evidence-based decisions so that decisions are not being made by conjecture or what we think or feel, but is driven by data. And then, of course, to address the sargassum seaweed, which is unfortunately a major impediment to development in some of the countries, affecting the tourism industry in particular. And of course, the fifth area was support for the engagement of a fish stock assessment expert from India to assist the region. The next participant from the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, and this will be the final participant I'll comment on at this time, is Mr. Christopher Worrell, a young Bahamian, extremely talented, in his 20s, leading the Bahamas Agriculture, Health, and Food Safety Authority, which comes under the ambit of the work of Member of Parliament for Fort Charlotte Mark Humes. BASFA, as it is called, Bahamas Agriculture, Health and Food Safety Authority, is responsible for maintaining animal health, plant health, and food safety in the Bahamas. Part of its institutional infrastructure is to collaborate with regional and international bodies that assist in maintaining its mandate. The Caribbean Agriculture, Health and Food Safety Agency is one of these agencies that it has a relationship with. It is mandated to perform a coordinating and organizing role for the establishment of an effective and efficient regional sanitary and phytosanitary regime, and to execute on behalf of member states such SPS, as we abbreviated, actions and activities that can be more effectively and efficiently executed through the regional mechanism. Just a bit of translation, Mr. Speaker. The focus of this really is, and it is not a sexy political topic, but is absolutely essential. BASFA is making sure that in this world of international trade, Mr. Speaker, that plant and animal products and their derivatives can move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction safely, that we are sure that in the process of them moving, we are not transferring diseases or we are not introducing invasive species that can decimate local species. And just to put this in context, one outbreak of a disease, because we don't have the required regime of surveillance, monitoring, of course, and of course interdiction, can result, as it has in other countries, to the tune of $80 million in terms of damages. It could be from salmonella or some other organism. It can, if we do not catch a number of these diseases at the border, it can result, as it has over the last few years for some countries, in the cost of $250 million, $350 million. I need not say what damage that can do to the Bahamas. And the Bahamas presently, Mr. Speaker, does not have a number of the critical requirements in place for surveillance, for ongoing monitoring, which would require, Mr. Speaker, ensuring that our laboratory facilities are up to international standards, particularly now that we are in discussion with respect to the ascension to the WTO. And so, Mr. Speaker, this conference was critical. It allowed Mr. Worrell to interact with his colleagues from around the region with a view of learning what are the best practices that are in place and making sure that we are able to bring those practices on shore in the Bahamas. I would not go into the background at this time or the current actions, but will only comment very briefly on the future actions by BASFA. One, will focus on the development of a regional disaster preparedness guidance document for food safety, animal and plant health. Two, we will be engaged in the development of guidelines for the use of antimicrobials in the animal production. Three, development of a model law for biosafety in the region. We will harmonize protocols for the movement of dogs and cats moving through the Caribbean. 5, harmonize conditions for a permit controlling the importation of live caprine and ovine from CARICOM countries, and make sure that protocols on the safe movement of plant germplasm within the CARICOM region. Mr. Speaker, there are at least 11 other objectives, but these we will publish in short order in the press so the persons can read it in its entirety. So, Mr. Speaker, it is our intention to report on all trips and to indicate what the benefits are for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I see Reverend Hall is Bishop Hall is in the gallery. We had an extensive presentation by the University of the West Indies and others on the cannabis industry that is mushrooming in the region, and I'm sure Reverend Hall will, as a pivotal member of that committee, have a chance to review that particular discussion. We also look at the coconut industry, where more than 250,000 acres in the region is being put under cultivation in coconut production, and we also look at small ruminants, which hold huge potential for the region, and of course attended workshops on poultry production. The Bahamas supplies less than 10% of the poultry consumed in the Bahamas. We believe it's a huge economic opportunity for the country. We were able to make contact with a number of investors, and I happened to see the president of the Christian Council, Mr. Delton Fernanda, who is well aware of one of those investors who left Barbados on the Saturday that I left, came to the Bahamas, met, of course, with the senior staff members of the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources, representing a number of important companies, including Israeli companies, who wish to collaborate with us to replace the loss of capacity that they had in Mexico after the earthquake. Brackish water wiped out a lot of their production capacity, and they wish to partner with the Bahamas in producing a number of important crops for export to the U.S. And Reverend Fernando, we are committed to collaborating in that regard and look forward to further developing the proposal that has been sent. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Honorable members, just before we proceed, I would like to refer you to page 37 in the Rules of Procedure, Rule 44 and 45. Rule 44 states, a minister may make a statement when statements and communication by ministers are called in the order of business or on private notice to the Speaker at any other time during a sitting. Of course, there is no right or provision in these rules for any member who is not a minister to make a response to a minister's communication. Notwithstanding, if the Speaker is of the view that some contentious statement or some controversial statement is made during the minister's communication, then some response can be permitted. But that is at the exclusive discretion of the chair. Now, with respect to members' statements, when a member makes a statement, Rule 45(3) says, if a statement by a member is critical of a minister or government service, the minister who has responsibility for the ministry concerned shall have a right to reply. So those two rules make it very clear that in the order of business, under Rule 44, when we are at that stage of the order of business, only ministers are permitted to speak unless the chair is of the view that some contentious matter or controversial matter has been raised by the minister. On the other hand, under Rule 45, subsection 3, when we arrive at member statements, the minister has a right, according to the rules, of response. Further statements and communications by ministers.
There are no further statements, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and writs, new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentation of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Killarney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Bankers and Trust Companies Regulations Act to provide for the administration and regulations of dormant account balances held by the bank.
Is there a second now? Order that the bill be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Banks and Trust Companies Regulation Act to provide for the administration and regulation of dormant accounts balances held by banks. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who are opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Banks and Trust Companies Regulation Act to provide for the administration and the regulation of dormant account balances held by banks.
Further, first reading of bills. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Kalani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act to provide for the transfer to the Treasurer and disposal of dormant account balances paid to the Central Bank and for connected purposes.
Is there a second now? Order that the bill be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act to provide for the transfer to the Treasurer and disposal of dormant accounts balances paid to the Central Bank and for connected purposes. Order that the bill be read for the first time. Sorry, correction. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act to provide for the transfer to the Treasurer and disposal of dormant account balances paid to the Central Bank and for connected purposes.
Further first reading of bills.
There are no more further first readings, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Second reading and committal of bills. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Yamacraw.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on this occasion, on this historical occasion, to begin debate on the Bahamas Baptist Missionary and Educational Convention Incorporated Bill 2018. Mr. Speaker, this is an historical moment for me to make this presentation, because in this presentation, Mr. Speaker, we will have an opportunity today to look through the eyes of our forefathers who were slaves and see what grandeur or what vision God laid on their hearts. Because today we sit in these hallowed halls and in the chamber, and we can see the result of their dreams, their aspirations, their prayers, their commitment to self-discipline and enterprise. Mr. Speaker, before going into this presentation on this debate, Mr. Speaker, I beg leave and crave your indulgence just to make a few observations and comments, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me if I did not recognize the family of the late Edmund Moxie and congratulate not only this government, but as South and Central Andros indicated, that Mother Pratt, as she's known, made some efforts to bring us to this point where we are today. But I want to single out the member for St. Barnabas for his diligence and hard work in bringing us to this point, to recognize a son of the soil who made the ultimate sacrifice, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I speak of which I know. I do recall that as a young boy coming from Kedan, as I said, on the boat, I had the opportunity to spend quality time with my late father, Mr. Oscar Johnson. And in spending time with him, there were certain things that Daddy did that some would think strange. And there were some men that I could not be in their presence. There were some men that he allowed me to listen to, because he said, and there was some in their presence, and there were some men he said, I need you to sit in the back and just hear, because I want you to learn something. But Mr. Edmund Moxie was one of those men that Daddy said to me that your spirit must commune with his spirit. Because you cannot have a discussion with him. You can give common pleasantries like yes sir, no sir, and those different things. But I want your spirit to commune with his spirit. And so I had that opportunity to do that. And I'm grateful today, and on another occasion I know we'll have a discussion on the matter. I'm grateful today that we are recognizing history. We're recognizing a commitment to self-discipline in the life and work of Mr. Edmund Moxie. So I concur with the speakers who spoke before, Mr. Speaker. And I pray that his soul rests in peace. Mr. Speaker, I would like to extend condolences to the family of the late Mr. Bradley Roberts, a former cabinet minister, a former MP, a son of the soil. And I pray that his soul rests in peace, Mr. Speaker, and that God would continue to bless and comfort his family during this time of their bereavement. Mr. Speaker, I crave your forbearance for just one more moment to express condolences, Mr. Speaker, to a lady who Longfellow would have termed a genius, in the person of Miss Zenaida Dorset. She passed suddenly, Mr. Speaker, and I described it, my emotions on learning of her passing, as a shock. Some of my colleagues stated that being shocked would be an understatement. And they were correct, Mr. Speaker. And why I say she was a genius, there's a quote that I sometimes use from Longfellow that describes her and what sometimes women go through. And Longfellow says that he is no true man who ever treats woman with anything but the profoundest respect. She is no true woman who cannot inspire and does not take care to enforce this. Any rivalry of their sexes is the sheerest of folly and most unnatural. God has placed the genius of woman in their heart, because the works of this genius are always works of love. And so, Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity to extend condolences to the family, friends of Miss Zenaida Dorset, her children, Patrice, Spence, and Mark. She was an avid supporter of the party. And Mr. Speaker, when I decided to come and run for the constituency of Yamacraw, she was a fearless warrior, committed, Mr. Speaker. She was my chairman. And so, Mr. Speaker, I would just like to again express condolences to the family and to say that I'm in mourning, her family is in mourning, and I pray God's continued blessings on them, on us all, during our time of bereavement. Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, this is indeed a proud moment for me, and this is indeed a historical moment for me. And as I sat to prepare last night for this debate or this presentation today, I thought of what I would say, because I was getting information from many members from the Baptist community on the history. I got a history lesson of the Baptist community. And so, Mr. Speaker, before I go into my presentation, it would be remiss of me if I did not, Mr. Speaker, through you, beg leave just to take recognition or recognize some of the persons who are here with us, distinguished men and women who stand on the shoulders of our forefathers who were slaves in the gospel. I'd like to recognize the President, Reverend Dr. Lloyd Smith, his first, second, third, and fourth Vice President, in the persons of Reverend Philip McPhee, Reverend Stanley Ferguson, Reverend Everett Brown, and Bishop Delton Fernanda, the President of the Bahamas Christian Council. I would like to, and all of them are near and dear to me, I would like to recognize the Right Reverend Carrington and Sabrina Pinder, and he is the General Superintendent of the St. John Native Baptist Churches, and I hope I got it right, Reverend Simnet. I'm going to get to Reverend Simnet, who I know may be watching, and the reason why I remember Reverend Pinder and Reverend Simnet from when I was a boy, and as I go through this historical journey of where we came from as a church and to where we are, I will make mention of Reverend Simnet, Reverend Carrington Pinder, and most certainly the Mount Sinai Baptist Church that is pastored by my aunt and mom who raised me up in Cat Island and who I hope is watching today. Reverend Michael Simonet, the treasurer, Reverend Diana Francis, Reverend Wilton Strawn, a former commissioner of police, a man that is near and dear to me, and I say all are near and dear, but I used to be a police officer, and they say once the police, always the police.
Good guy.
Reverend Victor Cooper, Reverend Simeon B. Hall, Bishop Hall, a man that I love and respect, Reverend Roscoe Roll, I'm going to stop adding this little adjective. Reverend Gloria Ferguson, the recording secretary, Bishop Arnold Josie, a man that I admire and respect, Mr. Speaker. And I'll tell you, I went to a church service, and he was coming to bless the headquarters. And after the church service and all that he had to say, which was extremely objective, we went to the building where Bishop Josie was to bless the headquarters. And Bishop Josie turned to me in the presence of everybody and said, "Ellsworth, where's your wife?" And so I gave him an explanation, but I'm grateful for that, to see the life that he lived. Because as I take you through the history of this church, I'm going to show of this experience, you will see the humanity in this experience. I would recognize family and recognize the dignity and the sanctity of women. Because as you see and you look at the educational experience of this movement, you would see how it educated the people who did not have education. It went in there where the government could and built schools and all those different things. So I'll get to that. I'd like to recognize Bishop J. Carl Ramming, Vice President at Large, Bishop B. Wennett Davis. Everybody knows Bishop Davis. Dr. Philip Ramming, Dr. King Delavo, Dr. Charles Culmer, Dr. Alonzo Hinsey from the St. John's Native Baptist. And I remember you, Dr. Hinsey. Dr. Wilton McKinsey, Reverend Stephen Baccaris, and I'm hoping that I'm not leaving out everybody. We had Reverend Moxie from another denomination who was here this morning. And I cannot forget my friend and colleague in the profession, Reverend Roll. And even though Reverend Dr. Michael C. Simnet is not here today, I want to recognize him in his absence, because as we go down this journey of memory lane, I want to commend you. I want to commend you for honoring Dr. Simnet, and in the process, as you go to continue to build, I see from the President's speech that a building will be named in the honor of Reverend Michael C. Simnet. I thank you for your kind indulgence, and I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today. Mr. Speaker, as I indicated earlier, this debate, or this movement here today, represents the culmination of more than 100 years of history, self-discipline, a commitment to industry, but most importantly, to the work of God. And I'll tell you how. Because this journey down memory lane is one of the quintessential expressions of what Christ said, that if you, the least you do unto these, you have done it unto me. So as I go, Mr. Speaker, I will speak to you about the church and the church's involvement in the prison. I will speak to you about the movement of the Baptists in the community and their involvement with children and the protection of children and women and recognizing the human dignity of women. I will speak to you about the church and their attempts to feed the hungry and dispossessed. I will speak to you about a group who recognize that there are strangers among us and that they're entitled to be respected and they're entitled to be supported. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I prepared, I looked through the lens of Dr. Gail Sanders and Michael Creighton as they looked at the history of the Bahamas and how the Bahamas was developed. And they paint a picture of a pristine, beautiful, archipelagic nation with turquoise water, fish running through it, and everything appearing to be tranquil. Everything appearing to be, as what the song says, that this is the place where God came to have his vacation. But in the midst of it, Mr. Speaker, they spoke about the difficulty of having to go through these islands by boat. And I'm not talking about a motorboat, Mr. Speaker. I'm talking about sailboat. I'm not talking about a boat. And the young people have to hear this, because we stand on the shoulders of some giants. Not only do we stand on the shoulders of some giants, Mr. Speaker, I dare to say we have much more to do because the baton has been handed to us. Mr. Speaker, this journey started with Mr. Prince William, a slave who came here, and Mr. Daniel Wilshire. He was of European descent. But Mr. Speaker, sometimes the history is not always written properly. Because if one looks at it, you would get the impression that Mr. Wilshire was the one who really gave the catalyst to everything. He did great works, and we will acknowledge him for it. Because I am of the belief that he was a man guided by God and his Holy Spirit. But Mr. Prince William, Mr. Speaker, a slave who came to the Bahamas, first started this journey. And I want us to just stick a pin and think about Mr. Prince William and what it meant. What was he leaving? What did he come to the Bahamas to aspire to? What were his goals and his objectives? It was freedom. It was liberty. The right to worship, interact, and move into society. That was what he intended. He came, Mr. Speaker, intending that one day you would have the right Reverend Doctor. Because the story as it's told about Prince William and the other persons who weren't properly trained was that they started a work that saw Prince Will, a work that saw the Bahamas Baptist College. And I remember when I was starting my journey trying to get into university, I did remedial classes there. And so they were there filling one of the largest educational institutions in the Bahamas outside of the government. That is what he saw. He might not have been able to articulate it, but that is what he saw. And so you hear about Mr. Wilshire and the Zion Baptist Church, Salem Baptist Church. And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to take you on a course of the men who affected this change. And there were a number of persons, Mr. Speaker. As I said, you had Frank Spence and Mr. Prince William, and that was back from the 1800s, Mr. Speaker. And then you had one John Burton, who came from Jamaica. These persons came in, and one of the things about it is that they were not in the mainstream churches. They were not Catholic. They were not Anglican. So they were not a part of the aristocracy. Yes. At that time, they were not entitled to anything, but they dared to dream. They dared to dream, Mr. Speaker. And so you see a church,
Say that again.
you see a church, Mr. Speaker,
Is the Baptist of this
who
church.
started by way of our forefathers, who dared to dream, or as Mr. Barack Obama said, who had the audacity of hope and a dream. And we see my good friend, Mr. Roll. We see Bishop Delton Fernando, and I remember Bishop Delton Fernando and I were in the St. John's Native Baptist Society as young men, singing in the choirs and doing it all. And I don't think we fully appreciated what we were going through then, because we didn't properly tell the story. But they were not a part of the mainstream churches. There was a fight for people of color to get into the mainstream churches. The prayers of the Baptists and other churches were thought of as noise, racket. And I'm being as objective and honest as I possibly can. Noise and racket. But it wasn't noise and racket. You have to understand it. I remember when I was a young person in the church, and when the old lady came and said, let's sing It's So Sweet to Trust in Jesus. I don't sing that no more. Let's get a beat one. But if you go through enough, I said one day, as my mother said, elsewhere, I'm going to be 49 soon. And you know, she describes me as young, handsome, black, and sexy. Made in the image, and frankly, made in the image and likeness of God. And so, you know, I had to say to myself, I went to church after coming into politics, and I'm asking for It's So Sweet to Trust in Jesus. And sometimes you will get to the point where you go to the altar and you will cry. And you will make some funny noise.
Yes.
And so I say that to say this with a little satire, that the noise that they made was as a result of the frustration that they felt inside. Couldn't go to Bay Street. Couldn't go and buy from certain stores. Couldn't eat in the same restaurants. There are a number of things that they couldn't do. So they had to play the music hard. They had to thank Jesus because they saw us. But one of the things I want you to stick a pin here, there'll be 2 pins, is that we must have the same dream and aspirations for 100 years on. The same dream and aspiration, Mr. Speaker, that they had, the burning passion. So now you see why a people would praise the way they praise. Because there was social desegregation, there was victimization, there was brutalization, there was ostracization. And now we could see why Mama said, hey, play that music a little hard. And so, as we come from Mr. Prince William, and you see Mr. Ware, and the churches that they built, and you know what they did? They went to places that was deserted by many people. Just asking my colleagues to keep the time, because sometimes I go a little long. They went to places. That's right. They went to places. I'm going to get to the bill. These stories have to be told. They went to places that people had neglected. They went to islands and keys that people did not want to go to. And they create churches. That's how we got Sunday school. That's how you knew that you had to learn to read by way of the Bible, or through the Christian education program. Because of the Baptist connection with the institution in the U.S., institutions in the U.S. So they introduced education. They introduced women's group, men's group. One of the affiliate, not an affiliate, but a group, a very important group in the church grouping, is that of the Jumper Church. They call themselves the Holy Jumpers. Bands, just like the Baptists. They introduced bands. They brought in the Boys Brigade in some of the churches. Youth groups. They taught you how to dress when people were saying you should not even be dressed in a suit. Can you imagine?
taught you how to look in someone's eyes, when the laws then was you should not look in some people's eyes. And so this is what the churches did. And so, Mr. Speaker, we saw Salem, we saw the annex. And you know why it's important to tell these stories? Because some of us just get crazy. Some of us just get crazy. And I ain't getting to the political, economic side of it that the church contributed to in this country. Because when many of us was running for cover, it was those Baptist reverends who got up. When some union leaders were afraid, it was those Baptist preachers that got up. When politicians were afraid and said, this ain't the night I can come out, there were Baptist preachers that got up. And the significant thing about it, Mr. Speaker, as we celebrate 50 years of Martin Luther King, is they did it with love. They did it with hope. They did it with respect for the law, and with an aspiration that not only just black people, but that white people would be able to live in a community where there's peace and respect for all. Look, and I want us, as we go and consider this legislation, look through the eyes of Mr. Prince William, and see what he saw. Okay. Look through the eyes of Mr. Prince William and see what he saw. You weren't entitled to property. You couldn't live in certain places. Let's say you couldn't live there, but there was that aspiration. He wasn't entitled not to be a lawyer or a doctor or whatever have you, or to be a fisherman that own a big boat. That was the aspiration. Today now we got sanitation engineers. Every young person, whether they, and color doesn't matter here now, should know of the contribution that the Baptist community gave to the development of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, the church was also very involved from the days, and you got to look back from Mr. Prince, Reverend Prince William. There was a time when you couldn't own bank accounts. There was a fight for that by the church. Whether they had ASU, or you go to Rev and you put all the money there. I tell you which I know. I grew up on Cat Island, Dowd's Cat Island. And so we knew when Reverend Simmons was coming. You get the cassava, you get the cane, convention is coming. And my grandmother didn't have much, but she had something for an envelope to put in for Ellsworth, Perry, and Ken. She had that to build something. And when you look through their eyes, it wasn't just for giving, but just for giving. It was because they had that passion to create an environment where children and young persons could self-determine. And so they taught you the importance of saving. You saw the church come up, everybody get together, and you try your best to build that and paint that. You joined the choir. And when it's time to go and represent the church, that's how you got culture. I could sing a song and probably carry 2 pieces, 3, 2, or 4 pieces, because you knew that you had to, when it was time, you get up. That's how a lot of those children learn how to play musical instruments. And the church did that. So it created an environment not just by building churches. It created an environment where you aspired to be businessmen. And you have a number of persons in here, I think everybody in here, whether they're Catholic, Anglican, or whatever have you, of being influenced by the movement of the Baptists and the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And so, Mr. Speaker, we now see schools where there was never an intention to give schools. If you go way back, you see it now. You see an intention from the presentation of the Speaker, of the President of the Convention, for insurance, to refurbish new buildings, to take education to a higher height. Not only that, but to honor You know, one of the things the good book said, normally what happened in the good book, and we have to do it much more, and I commend St. Barnabas. You see the church now creating a monument and recognizing people for the good work that they have done. So, Mr. Speaker, in the work of the church, you saw human rights. And I know everything is now thrown into a bucket and called human rights today. But when I say human rights, you see the church respecting a right in accordance with the law to choose. You see a human rights while looking through the lens of Christ, where you look for the least among us and see how best we can support them, Mr. Speaker. You see, this church played a very important role in majority rule. Because I tell you, I wasn't there, but I listened to the stories. You had to have nerve. Don't mind how the stories are told today. You had to have nerve. And it was at that time that the church stood. And it stood in a way that is remarkable. Because the church did not advocate violence. The church advocated education. A peaceful and silent, but yet effective resistance. And this is where we are today. And I'm happy, Mr. Speaker, to say that I stand on the shoulders of these men and women. And that all of us in here stand on the shoulders of these men and women. Sometimes we get crazy, you know, we heavy, you know. I went to a function the other day, and one of the permanent secretaries was talking about the public service. And the persons who went ahead, and how we who now stand on their shoulders, some of us are very heavy. We're heavy with ignorance. Heavy with ignorance. Because some of the things that make us who we are, we have abandoned it. We become too intelligent, as we say. Don't pray no more. We see some of these right reverend gentlemen. I'm not even talking about the right reverend gentlemen. You may see that old lady. And you walk straight past her and pretend as if you don't know her. Her English may not be the best, but remember, it was that bad English that got on the knees years ago when they were slaves and prayed for us for today. But today we play stupid. And I'm just sticking a pin here to say how some of us need to just lighten the load. Pardon me? Yes. Some of us need to lighten the load. Come to grips with where we have come from. Come to grips with where we are. And come to grips with the obligation that we have to take this country forward. You did not see a Prince William who thought that he was entitled. He sailed here not on a motorboat. Correct me if I'm wrong. You didn't see a Prince William who thought that he had arrived. You didn't see a Prince William who begged. And there's a way to ask for things and still maintain your dignity without begging, because Christ said you receive not because you ask not. But there's a level of respect and courtesy with which you approach the throne of grace. That's the way you are. You didn't see a Prince William like that. As you come through, and I just want to identify Angliston, and you look at her father, you're a fighter. A fighter. Yeah, she is a fighter. You see a fighter. You see fighters. Yeah. We see fighters who dreamed and aspired. So, Mr. Speaker, there were certain periods in the church. You saw from Prince William. You saw from Prince William. You saw Reverend Kerr. You saw Reverend Enoch. And a number of other persons. You saw coming right up to the president. But there was a Renaissance period, Mr. Speaker, that I would like to refer to. And it's no better than any other period with Bishop Sanders, where you saw the expansion of educational institutions, and the name escapes me now. There's a great Charles Sanders. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the correction, sir. Reverend Dr. Charles W. Sanders. Pastor Emeritus at Salem Union Baptist Church.
Great example.
Yes.
Great
A
example.
great example. And Mr. Speaker, you saw the expansion of schools. You saw a community college. But more than the edifice, you saw the dream and you saw the aspiration person out from where they said we could not go and what we could not attain. And I see Reverend Carrington Pinder, and so you see a doctor coming out of the family and a number of other persons who are here. And that is what we got from that experience. And so what I want to say to Bahamians now is that the Bahamas National Baptist Missionary and Educational Convention provides an excellent example of where we have come from, where we are, and how much more we have to do and where we're going. Because the work has not even started as yet. So we have to save. We have to build. We have to build one of the best universities in the world. Continue on building up the tradition of some of the best schools in the Bahamas. We have to make contributions to the schools and to the union. So, Mr. Speaker, I stand here today to speak about all these great men and women who have made a significant contribution to the Bahamas. But one of the things I want to leave with you before I go into this bill is that the example set for us by Reverend Prince William and all of those before us should be a strong, powerful, and the right type of pride. People with pride, dignity, and integrity. That's what builds what we have here today. That we are not beggars. That we are fighters. That sometimes we may disagree. But at the end of the day, even teeth and tongue does clash. But we must remain committed. And if any time you feel a little despondent, just think about those persons leaving with us. When I used to travel the islands, it was almost Cat Island, Rumkin Consultants in Salvador can attest. That boat would take sometimes up to 14 hours. Well, you had the sailboat. And so, the Will Laurier. And so, but if you were traveling by sailboat, can you imagine, like an old man said, when there was no wind? When there's no wind? But remember that we have persons among us who are now coming by sailboat. I remember the first person did come by sailboat. But in those times, they were not afforded certain basic courtesies. We are obligated in terms, as we follow the law, to offer certain basic courtesies in accordance with the law. That is who we are. So we're not beggars, we're strong. We are prideful people. We teach our children that hard and smart work pays off. And so, Mr. Speaker, we're here today, and it's my distinguished pleasure to present the Bahamas Baptist Missionary and Educational Convention Incorporated Bill 2018. And I will take you through this bill. And Mr. Speaker, this is long and coming. It should have been done a long time ago. But thank you very much for your hard work. And the short title, Mr. Speaker. Okay. The short title is this act may be cited as the Bahamas Baptist Mission and Educational Convention. And Mr. Speaker, what this corporation soul or this bill intends to do is to create a legal office. A legal office for the trustees to hold. So that, and it's nothing unusual. The Archbishop of Canterbury and a number of churches have them in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Even the governments use them. and is intended so that property and business may be done through this legal entity. And so what they're trying to avoid, because we see it sometimes, you know, sometimes people work dead hard and then their children come and say, this is my daddy church. And so they're working out a structure in contemporary times as to how we will do our business. And I commend the President and all of these right reverend gentlemen and women who support him, and indeed their congregations. Section 2 incorporates the trustees to be a corporation sole, and I just explained what the corporation sole is. It's the creation of a legal office in which the trustees will sit, and I'll go through the rest of the bill. The power of the incorporated trustees to acquire property. The incorporated trustees, and I will read a bit of it, shall have power to acquire by purchase, transfer, donation, exchange, device, bequeath, grant, gift, conveyance, or otherwise, any real or personal property or any estate or interest therein. And Mr. Speaker, as I go on, I want to commend Bishop Dalton, Fernando, and President Smith for their work with the government. That's something that I left out. Even in terms of how the church worked throughout the century, more than a century, to build this country. Today, the church is still coming to the government and offering its objective view on legislation, its objective views on governance. And as a result, we're able to make right and proper decisions. And it would be remiss of me if I did not commend the leader of the opposition, Mr. Philip Brave Davis, and I'm quite certain that the Prime Minister may speak to it further, as we take this track to respond to some of the legislative requirements that we're now facing, like the church. We've met, and the AG will, on his return, will comment on it. We've met with the leader of the opposition and his team, and they've provided excellent advice, which this government will take into consideration as we forge forward. And so, Mr. Speaker, Section 4 incorporates the trustees entitled to deal with the property. And it says the incorporated trustee shall, subject to any restraints, reservations, or conditions contained in the document under which they shall have acquired title thereto, be entitled to sell, mortgage, lease, and otherwise dispose and deal with all property which may be from time to time be vested in them. And so that gives them a right to deal with the property. Section 5, the change of persons holding office of trustees, not to affect the property. So we know people will come. God gives, God takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Some of us, we aren't here forever. But as we see from Prince William, he understood that the work that he started, he was not going to finish it. And you know, as I sat and I thought the other day, and I was talking to one of my colleagues, in the great, if you look at a nice, when they used to make the blanket out of the scrap cloth, as beautiful as it is, in the tapestry of that cloth, our work in that tapestry is about a fiber. But we must contribute our fiber and move on gracefully. Because in time, God will replace someone there to continue to have it done. And so this provision is like that. There are persons who have their time, and they will move on, and there will be others. The power to appoint a power of attorney. Section 7, who will be deemed the incorporated trustees, and it speaks to how you select trustees and who will go in, how the organization will do that. Vesting of the property at present is held in trust. And Section 10 gives the incorporated trustees, I'll read it for you. Section 10 reads, rules. The incorporated trustees, with the approval of the annual General Conference of the Bahamas National Baptist Mission and Educational Convention, may make rules for administration of the temporal affairs of the Bahamas Baptist Missionary and Educational Convention. And so that is the extent of the legislation, Mr. Speaker. I would also like to recognize Reverend Francis and that's Mr. Wolo Francis' sister. Please forgive me. And the member for South and Central Andros just sang a bit of the song that he penned, the leader of the Shell Saxon Superstars, but I just would like, through you, Mr. Speaker, to recognize her. So, Mr. Speaker, this is indeed a momentous occasion which we should all celebrate, because it recognizes a slave. And you know what's important about this? And it always causes me to chuckle when I sit with my aunts. Never finished school, but they got some things that would blow your mind. Never went to university. And I told the story the other day. I called my aunt and she says, be quiet. She says, you never know if a boat could take sea if it stay tied to the dock. Then the man in the engine hole always below water level. And one thing that can't happen when a boat's sailing in the deep sea is the engine can't stop. You got to do your work. And I constantly think about that, because you think about it, and sometimes I go on YouTube and I pull up, what you call it? A boat on rough seas. And even watching that, I get a little sick. But it was so profound. But we could see how a slave, who nobody thought had the ability, dreamt of where we are today. And there's so many stories that could come for that. We may meet that young boy, because he thought about them. That young girl, he thought about them. Those circumstances, he thought about them. And you can either decide to be the pharaoh to that person, or you could be a blessing. But you must try your best, and that is what this movement, and where we are today, and the church represents in the Bahamas. So, Mr. Speaker, that is the end of my contribution. I support this movement without more. I thank you for your kind indulgence, sir.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Is there a seconder? The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As a good guideline in how long I would be, just know that we are out by one. Mr. Speaker, I pay respect to the family of Edmund Moxie. You know, on my mother's side, I'm from Dowds, Chet Island, New Bight, Chet Island, the grandson of Amelia Hepburn, Nee Pratt, and I believe in the Baptist Convention they know her well, and had the good fortune of traveling to Dumfries, Chet Island, where she went to preach on behalf of the Baptist community. On my father's side, I'm from Ragged Island, and Edmund Moxie we claim clearly as family, and proud to be associated with him, and thank God for Mother Pratt, and thank God for young men like Shenandoah Cartwright, who continue to make all of us proud. Mr. Speaker, this is a wonderful occasion to celebrate with one of the most powerful movements in the history of the Bahamas. Marco City is honored to second this bill and join the Baptist leaders and colleagues here in supporting this important bill, the Bahamas Baptist Missionary and Educational Convention Incorporated Bill of 2018. I'm proud because today, in a small way, we are taking a step forward in supporting an even better organization of a movement that has been vibrant in religious circles, but also has been a force, a social movement that has influenced politics and every area of life in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, let me digress for a moment. When the United Nations was formed, it was formed as an intergovernmental agency because the notion back then, Pinewood, was that there was a need for governments to be properly organized to relate to each other because they took care of the needs of the people. By the time the United Nations met less than 20 years later, it was clear that governments were not the only actors on behalf of their people, but that there were many organizations in a society that played a pivotal role to address the needs of people where governments were unable or unwilling to meet those needs. Among those groups were the faith-based organizations and non-governmental organizations. The beauty today is that in the Bahamas, our faith-based organizations have the business sense to organize themselves, in some cases for profit, as well as non-governmental agencies that can do a tremendous amount of work on a volunteer basis, but need a structure to facilitate that work. And the Baptist community has been wise in that regard, and while many of them have done it in their individual churches as a corporate body, it hasn't happened. And so today, it is an honor to be in this place as you take this additional step. Because truly, there are some needs in the Bahamas successive governments have not been able to successfully meet, that you've been meeting all along. And so on behalf of all of us who have benefited in some way, I want to say thank you for the incredible sacrifice that many of you have made, being the conduit of salvation for families when you were traveling and your family was at home. And so we thank you. At pivotal times in our nation history, Mr. Speaker, Baptist leaders and their members influence events. And in so doing, they shaped our history, and in many ways, they continue to shape a modern Bahamas. Consider this for a moment. In the midst of minority rule, when our people were marginalized, disenfranchised by racism, the clergy stood up and spoke out. Among them, and often at the forefront of them, were Baptist leaders speaking truth to power and inspiring their congregation to keep the faith. For their change would come. And today, as we look in this parliament at the children, grandchildren, and in the case of young Travis and Gibson, great-grandchildren, the change has come. The fact that these same parishioners' children are here can tell you that your labor was not in vain. And I know you're a human being, so much like us, you go through moments of depression, and you have rejection even among those who you help most frequently. But be not weary of well-doing, for in due season you shall reap. And if you faint not, and I know. Mr. Speaker, whether it was Burma Road or it was Black Tuesday, where the masses of people stood outside calling for justice, Baptist leaders' voice factored in these pivotal moments in our history. Whether it was the Bahamian people withholding their labor when things were not right, the Baptist leadership played a pivotal role. The truth is, you've been a part of an incredible tradition. And I can't help but reflect on the role you played not only in the lives of others, but in my own life. And I salute the leaders who are here today who've adopted really that same kind of spirit that would have no doubt motivated James Weldon Johnson in his crying out when he said, "Lift every voice and sing. Tell earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listing skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Men and women of faith, Baptist wordsmith, truth tellers, like, I tell you, some folks over there have made a difference in a lot of our lives. In the midst of scarcity and opportunities, when the people had limited work opportunities and were stressed out on how to pay their bills and provide for their children, with a quality education, many of these men and women of faith were there speaking to these people. And the beauty of many of you, you didn't just describe the problem. Instead, many of our Baptist leaders spoke life over our forefathers and mothers. Sometimes when people going through a rough time, rather than hear more of the misery that even a blind man could see, it's good to speak life, and many of you have spoken life. In the midst of speaking life, we have these fearless men and women who had no problems with calling for the walls of Jericho in our banks on Bay Street to come down. They had no problem on insisting that when we lived in Freeport that we didn't have to leave the city. Who had no problem saying that the Savoy should have been integrated. You spoke truth to power. But the beauty is, colleagues, that they didn't just stop there, fighting for people affected with material lack or discrimination. These preachers, our historic preachers, stood in the gap and interceded on behalf of our people. Because you know, sometimes when activism ain't working, I'm told reliably by Sister Laura Benson, my mother, that prayer changes things. And many Baptist leaders spend a lot less time in ceremonies and a lot more time in the wilderness on their face before God. And that intercession is what has brought many of us here today and keep us here despite the fact that we've often not walked in the will of God. Thank you all for standing in the gap for us. And so I want to say on behalf of many of us who've been sustained by your prayers and your efforts that we are grateful. And you not only spoke to God, you spoke to our nation leaders on our behalf and reminded our forefathers and mothers that they ought to rely less on men and more on God. That was a good message. And that is the message that brought us here, because though our people loved Sir Lyndon for a season, it was God. Though they loved the Honorable Hubert Ingram for a season, it was God. Though they loved Perry Gladstone Christie for a season, it was still God you told them to rely on. And though they will love Hubert Minnis for a season, you are telling them it is still God they should lean on. And so even in our toughest moments, it is a very sobering thing to know that if you're not in this place, it could still be all right. Because we live, move, and have our being in God, not in this place. It's but one of the vehicles that we usher in change in this country. And the reality is, some days it is not the most important one. I remember Lindy Russell used to be in here, a powerful man of God. And what is amazing about it is Lindy is not in here where we make a difference. Yes, some changes occur. But imagine walking where you walk, where you are able to make changes in an eternal way. Because, administration change. Sometimes in the same administration, ministers change, and they change things. And so a lot of the things we usher in are temporary, but when you're able to introduce somebody to their eternal destiny, that's an incredible calling. I often wonder why ministers consider politics, but that's a different story for a different time. And so I'm grateful for the sacrifices that you have made, to continue to point to us that God is our ultimate source. That God, when we call on him, would show up and show out. And so I'm grateful to you that you didn't merely fan the flame of discontent, but that you delivered a message of hope and exhortation. And that you convinced a hurting people that there are answers to the trials and tribulations that they were experiencing. Your spiritual activism contributed to the end of minority rule. Your spiritual activism put thousands of people on Clifford Park looking up as the Union Jack came down. Your activism and spiritual fervor is what motivated me as a young man living in Yellow Elder to walk to Zion, where my father used to worship before he passed, to hear Michael Simonet, Ari Cooper, the powerful Timothy Stewart, and of course, Simeon Hall, I would walk there from Yellow Elder, hear the service, and then walk over the bridge to go to Britannia to work the graveyard shift as a security officer. It was the powerful word that came from fearless men who were unbowed that motivated a number of us. You never know who you're touching. And these Baptists were never confused about who, as a people, we should lean on. And they weren't trying to gain brownie points, just attacking the arms of flesh. You don't say they can fail. Why? You're shocked some days when they do. But you were reminding a frustrated, financially challenged people back then, sometimes it's similar to now, that Jehovah, Emmanuel, Yahweh was able, and I still, today, I could still hear Simeon Hall when I went to those services, admonishing us to trust this God. Said, the God that I serve, he's able. He's able to reach out into nowhere and find something, take that something, nail it to nothing, and tell it to stay because he's God. That is the same God who called the cosmos out of chaos. I remember, I heard his voice, I still remember. And so, today it is an honor to be here, to lend my voice to the support of this organization who see a new Bahamas, where we are nurturing not merely employees, but employers, owners of this economy, and constructs such as what we are putting through in legislation today helps to facilitate the empowerment of our people. It is a wonderful thing. When a church faces discrimination and they hear about it through a member, and they don't have to go pleading and just marching, they could literally buy the building where the discrimination is taking place. That's the kind of power. And I'm happy to know that our churches are continuing on that path. And so I thank God for all of you, and we recognize that pastors, ministers, much like members of parliament, prayerfully less, are men with feet of clay. And some days we don't always get it right. But I believe that by the grace of God, through your intercession on our behalf, through your guidance, and when we're stubborn, through you speaking truth to power, that we will keep the faith and do the work of the people, that homes that may be lost in Manawa Circle will be saved, that the person in Tasman Close right now who's having challenge with their bills, that we'd be able to partner with them and help them. That folks who believe that there's a better dream, a better opportunity for their children in Canada or the U.S. would once again fall in love with the Bahamas and believe that we are able to stem the tide, to turn back the outflow of the best talent we have overseas to build other nations that are competing with us. Through your prayer, through your partnership, we are able to change things. To partner with Sister Emmanuel to make sure that we could create opportunities in Acklins and Crooked Island and Maguana and in Nagua, to let our people know that we don't value them any less. After all, look at the kinds of giants that they have produced over the years, that we are with them. That we are with Saudi Lutra, that it's time for them to rise up, and no select group of people will determine their destiny. They can make decisions for themselves, and the role of government is to facilitate. We are not the paragon of virtue or hold all knowledge, because the truth of the matter is, many times, there are far smarter people out there than us, and our role is to listen and to be responsive. Pray that our heart is always soft, our minds always open to hear from our people and reflect their dreams and aspirations and facilitate it. That's our role. So I thank you. I thank all the Baptist ministers who poured into our life. As Ellsworth made the point that I went to St. John's Native Baptist Church, and of course, O.A. Pratt, another Cat Island man, influenced persons like myself. And I went to Boys Brigade, and I learned a lesson. The Baptists have already always known discipline and self-reliance. That while we may knock on the door and hope to partner with you and sometimes ask governments to do some things to facilitate our continued development, you know that when governments fail to step up, you can keep on trucking, because that's the stock you're made out of. And that kind of example of discipline and self-reliance is what created fearless people in this country, because they saw you doing it when there was no other examples to stand up and do it. You showed us commitment. Don't be wary of being committed. Don't be wary of being committed. Because the truth is, your commitment inspires generations. I look at Reverend C.B. Moss, standing in the gap for a community that sometimes don't fully understand the level of commitment somebody has to have day in and day out to deny self, to be there on behalf of folks who sometimes may not even act in their own interest. I look at Philip McPhee, who's never left that area, and you know who has shown commitment over the years. It wasn't just a fulfillment of his father's dream, but it was a love for the community who never left. That's commitment, because many of us could go and do other things, but responding to the call is absolutely important. And I think of persons like Peter Pinder in Grand Bahama. I think of all of those ministers, Zion Baptist Church, New Canaan Baptist Church, Brother Washi, Fellowship Union Baptist Church, Reverend Derek Russell. There's so many names to call. And even independent of the religious community, we have national heroes in the midst who have penned words that the entire nation say, even when they don't know the face of a Philip Ramming. The Baptist community has much to be pleased for. And even at your lowest moment, you inspired us. For even when persons didn't get it right in the clergy and had moments of difficulty, you showed us what restoration means. You showed us what bouncing back meant. So that for the thousands of Bahamians who have problems and difficulties in their life and don't always get it right, they get to see men and women who, with a feet of clay, have had challenges and have come back and decided they would not allow some road bump, some bump in the road to prevent them from saying, "Thus says the Lord." Can you imagine? And so as I take my seat, I just want to say that this bill is but another step in what is a powerful story, not merely of a collection of churches, but of a movement that insists upon inclusion, that says it doesn't matter the hue of your skin, the socio-economic bracket that you came from, the labeling of the state on whether you are official church or unofficial church. You insisted by what you did, not merely by talking about it, that you ought to be fully included with all rights and privileges accorded to you. And it is true, your insistence is why young people could stand up and demand that they be mainstream, that they sit on boards, whether it's in their school, in their churches, that their voices be heard, that adults don't plan for them, but plan in conjunction with them. That's why women are standing up. It can't be right. 51% of the population is heard 10, 20, 30% of the time. All of these willingness to fight for inclusion is in part a result of the kind of fight that you've taken up, that you show up. And by the way you've conducted yourself, the self-reliance you've demonstrated, the ways in which you've weighed in on social, political, economic issues, you had to be included. And that powerful message is what have moved many of us. And so as I close, I remember, I can't help but remember one of the other things that you did for persons like me as children. All of us rehearsed it. And in this place, I know many of us have talked about it before, because it was at many Baptist churches I went where I heard the question being asked, watchman, oh watchman, what time is it? And I could still hear you all saying, it's time for the Baptist movement and for Bahamians who are right-thinking to grow less by division, but more by multiplication. I still hear you. Watchman, oh watchman, what time is it? It's time for the Bahamians to move out of the analog age into the digital age and embrace the opportunities that exist. Watchman, oh watchman, what time is it? We are moments away from ushering in a new cadre of Bahamians who are committed to ownership, not merely being employees. Watchman, oh watchman, what time is it? We are moments away of making sure that in education our children can excel so that they can proudly say we are as smart as anyone else, anywhere else in the world. We are moments away from Bahamians, in the words of Kendall Stubbs, when he talked about forgiveness. You know, Kendall made the point that you know, unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to be harmed by it. And so in that book he wrote, Fuel to Fly, he motivated all of us that whatever odds we have in this place, in the church community, that we ought to turn to each other instead of on each other. And so, pastors, we thank you. We ask you, be not weary of well-doing. Stay in the gap for us. Stand with us. This government is committed to transforming this country, but we cannot do it alone. We need you to stand with us, to pray for us in moments of hard-headedness, to chastise us, because we believe that together we're going to transform this country. And so God bless you, and Marco City supports this bill.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Before we proceed, without entering the debate, I just want to, I've been taken back in my memory as the Honorable Member spoke. And I grew up on Meeting Street when I came to Nassau from Inagua, from Great Inagua. My grandmother, Janet Regalia Burroughs, was the organist at Zion Baptist Church right here on Shirley Street. And I grew up with Miss Althea Mortimer, who was an Anglican, but our home was adjacent and east of Bethel Baptist Church. And I can remember the voice of Reverend Brown preaching on a regular basis. My bedroom happened to be on the west side of the home, and Reverend Brown would seem to be having service every day. But his word resonated with me. And as my brother from Marco City was speaking, and he started talking about the watchman. As the watchman of this parliament, I remember the words of Reverend Brown, can these dry bones live? And we are now at that time where we are going to feed those dry bones. And so, at this stage, I want to indicate to the Parliament that it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to incorporate the Bahamas Baptist Missionary and Educational Convention in the Bahamas. And before we break for lunch, as many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, we are at that hour, that moment, when we take our lunch break. And we do have another 6 persons up to speak. And we will be starting off with the leader of the opposition after lunch at 3 p.m. Mr. Speaker, it is our intention to have those 6 members speak and for us to pass this bill today in this House. So I do move now that the House suspends until 3 p.m. for the lunch break.
Second. It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.